It started with strange radio signals. I was sitting at my station in the cramped confines of the Mars research base, sifting through data collected over the past weeks. The isolation on Mars was heavy, and the silence sometimes felt oppressive. That day, the static of the radio caught my attention. "Can you decipher this?" I asked my teammate, Mark, who was hunched over his own terminal. I pointed to the screen where the waveform displayed erratic spikes, something out of the ordinary. He looked pale, his fingers hovering over the keyboard but not moving. "It sounds like a voice," he said, trembling slightly. His eyes darted around the room, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. I frowned, leaning closer. "What do you mean a voice?" "It's just noise." "I don't know," he muttered, glancing back at the screen. "But it gives me the creeps." That night, while I tried to shake off the unease, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was off. I lay in my bunk, the hum of the bass lulling me into a restless sleep. The radio crackled beside me, and I woke suddenly, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. I reached for the radio, groggy and confused, but the static morphed into something else, a whispering that sent chills down my spine. It was faint at first, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. "Emily." I shot up in bed, my heart racing. "Is someone out there?" I shouted into the darkness, hoping to dispel the encroaching dread. The only response was a burst of static followed by chilling laughter that echoed in my ears, reverberating through the small room. I stumbled out of bed, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Mark!" I called out, rushing to his bunk. I shook him awake, desperation creeping into my voice. "Did you hear that?" "The radio." "What?" "What's wrong?" he mumbled, groggy but alarmed. "It was talking to me. I swear. It said my name." Mark's eyes widened. "You're not serious." "I am. You need to listen." I urged, but when I turned to the radio, it was silent again, the screen displaying nothing but a soft glow. "Maybe it was just your imagination," he said, sitting up and rubbing his face. "Mars does strange things to people. I'm telling you, it wasn't just in my head." I insisted, my voice rising. "We need to investigate this." Reluctantly, he agreed. We decided to stay up, taking turns monitoring the radio for any further signals. Hours passed, and the air grew heavy with tension, each minute stretching into eternity. As the first light of dawn crept through the base's small windows, I could feel the fatigue setting in. Just as I was about to suggest a break, the radio crackled back to life. I leaned in, heart pounding, and froze as the whisper returned. "Emily." Mark's face paled even more. "This is insane," he whispered. "It knows your name." "Shut up." I hissed, trying to focus. "Let me hear it." The voice continued, threading through the static, insistent and urgent. "Help us. Please. Help." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. Silence. Then, laughter, loud and mocking, piercing the static like a shard of glass. It echoed around us, twisting into something sinister. "What the hell is going on?" Mark shouted, backing away from the radio. "Turn it off," I said, fear rising in my throat. But as he reached for the power button, I felt a pull, an overwhelming need to keep listening. "Wait. Don't." Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness as the power flickered and died. I gasped, my heart racing as we were engulfed in an eerie silence, broken only by our shallow breaths. "Emily." Mark's voice trembled in the dark. "What just happened?" "I don't know," I replied, trying to steady my breathing. "But we need to get the backup generator running." We fumbled our way through the dark, guided by the dim glow of emergency lights. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach as we reached the generator room. Can you handle it? I asked, knowing Mark had experience with the systems. Yeah, just give me a minute. He knelt down, working to restart the generator. As I stood nearby, the oppressive silence began to feel claustrophobic, and I felt an icy chill run through the air. The whispering returned, echoing in my mind. Help us. Mark, hurry. I urged, looking around anxiously. He was focused, sweat beading on his forehead. Almost there. Then the lights flickered back to life, illuminating the room. But as they did, the radio sparked and crackled ominously. I stepped back, a sense of dread washing over me. Don't turn it on. I warned. I have to see what it's saying, he insisted, reaching for the dial. Mark, please. But it was too late. He flipped the switch, and the radio roared to life, the whispers escalating into a cacophony of voices, overlapping and chaotic. Emily. Help us. We're trapped. The static grew deafening, and I stumbled back, clutching my ears. The room felt alive, pulsating with energy. I looked at Mark, whose face was pale with terror. What did we do? He breathed. Shut it off. Now. He fumbled with the controls, but the radio wouldn't respond. The voices became frantic, echoing in a haunting chorus. Help us. It's coming for you. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, this time plunging us into darkness once more. The whispers turned into screams, and I felt a cold gust of wind rush past me, chilling me to the bone. Mark. I shouted, reaching for him in the dark. Where are you? I'm here, he replied, his voice shaking. Get to the door. I urged, my heart racing as I felt something brush against my arm, cold and clammy. Go. Go. Mark yelled, and we sprinted toward the door, our breaths echoing in the silence. As we stumbled outside, the sun hit us like a shockwave, blinding and warm, and we gasped for air, trying to shake off the Ling-Aran. What just happened? Mark panted, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, I said, trying to catch my breath. But we can't go back in there. We stood outside, the vast Martian landscape stretching before us, a barren red wasteland that felt alien and hostile. I could still hear the echoes of the voices in my mind, pleading and desperate. We need to report this, I said, finally feeling a flicker of resolve. Mark nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. What do we even say? That we heard voices on the radio? Exactly that, I replied, steeling myself. We need to document everything, and then we get out of here. We returned to the base, the familiar corridors now feeling sinister. As we reached our command center, I began compiling our report, typing furiously. But just as I was about to submit it, the radio crackled to life again, sending a shiver down my spine. Emily, help us. I froze, feeling the air grow heavy around me. Turn it off. Please. Mark shouted, his voice panicked. I can't. I replied, paralyzed by fear. It's not letting me. The radio continued to call my name, the whispers growing louder, drowning out my thoughts. I could feel something sinister lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. Emily. Mark screamed, snapping me out of my trance. I stumbled back, hitting the console, and the radio went silent. The sudden quiet was deafening, but I could still feel the weight of unseen eyes upon us. We need to leave. Now, Mark said, his face a mask of fear. As we gathered our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The whispers were still echoing in my mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. We stepped outside, the sun shining down, but it felt different, as if the light had lost its warmth. The shadows were longer, darker, and I could have sworn I saw movement just beyond the horizon. Let's head to the rover, Mark urged, his voice trembling. As we walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling the weight of something ominous. Just as we reached the rover, the radio inside crackled again. "Emily, come back." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "We can't go back," I whispered, shaking my head. "Don't listen to it," Mark shouted, panic rising in his voice. We climbed into the rover, and I slammed the door shut, sealing us away from whatever haunted the base. I quickly started the engine, but as we prepared to drive away, the radio emitted one last chilling message: "You can't escape us." We sped off into the Martian landscape, the vast emptiness stretching before us, but the echoes of the voices lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the darkness we had encountered. As we drove, the horizon blurred, and I felt the weight of fear settle in my chest. I glanced at Mark, whose face was pale, eyes wide with dread. "Do you think it's really over?" he asked, voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "But we can't stop. We have to keep moving." For days, we navigated the desolate terrain, always feeling like we were being followed, the whispers echoing in the back of our minds. Every night, I found myself staring at the radio, half expecting it to crackle back to life. Eventually, we reached a temporary outpost, a small research facility meant for short stays. As we reported our findings, I noticed the other scientists exchanging glances, their expressions wary. "Strange radio signals," one of them scoffed. "You must have been imagining things." "But we heard them," Mark insisted, his voice rising. "They were real." "Enough of this," the lead scientist said, cutting him off. "You're just experiencing the psychological effects of isolation. Mars can play tricks on your mind." But I knew what we had encountered was more than just paranoia. The darkness was real, and it was still watching us. We spent the night in the outpost, but sleep was elusive. Every creak of the structure felt amplified, and I found myself jumping at every sound. Just as I was about to doze off, the radio in the corner of the room flickered on, the static buzzing to life. I shot up in bed, panic gripping me. "Emily, help us." "No!" I shouted, scrambling for the device. I fumbled with the buttons, but it wouldn't turn off. "Emily!" Mark yelled, waking up. "What's happening?" "I don't know." I screamed, throwing the radio against the wall in desperation. It shattered, but the voices continued, louder and more frantic. "Help us. We're trapped. Stop it." Mark shouted, but I felt a surge of anger. "Why won't you leave us alone?" I screamed into the void, my voice breaking. Suddenly, the whispers turned into a roar, a cacophony of voices that overwhelmed me. I felt something dark closing in, a presence that filled the room. "Get out! Get out!" I yelled, scrambling for the door. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me out of the room. "We need to go. Now!" We fled the outpost, adrenaline pumping through our veins. The night air was cold, and I could see the shadows moving around us. "Where do we go?" I gasped, looking around in panic. "There's a transport ship a few miles away," he said, urgency in his voice. "If we can reach it, we might be able to escape." We started running, fear propelling us forward. The darkness seemed to stretch infinitely, and I could hear the whispers echoing behind us, growing louder and more insistent. "Emily, come back." I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but I forced myself to keep moving. The ship loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the Martian sky. As we approached, I heard the static grow louder, the voices merging into a chaotic symphony. "Help us. You can't leave." Mark was already at the door, fumbling with the controls. "Hurry," he urged. I jumped inside, my heart racing as the door slid shut behind. "Is it working?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder. "I'm trying," he replied, his fingers flying over the controls. Just as the ship powered up, the lights flickered, and the whispers surrounded us. "You can't escape, we're with you." "No!" I screamed, slamming my hands against the walls. "Leave us alone." Suddenly, the ship shuddered, and the voices rose to a deafening roar. I felt a surge of terror as the darkness pressed in around us, and I could see shadows forming, twisting into grotesque shapes. "Emily, hold on!" Mark shouted, slamming the engines to full power. The ship lurched forward, breaking through the darkness as we shot into the Martian sky. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the voices, but they clung to me like a shadow. As we ascended, the radio crackled again, but this time it was different. The voices were fading, growing distant, their cries replaced by static. "We did it!" Mark yelled, relief flooding his voice. I opened my eyes, watching the Martian landscape recede below us, the shadows shrinking away. But even as we flew higher, I could still hear the faint echo of whispers in my mind. "Emily, help us!" We entered orbit, and as we prepared to leave Mars behind, I felt a flicker of hope. But the whispers remained, a reminder of the darkness we had encountered. "Are we safe now?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mark nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I hope so." As we set our course for Earth, I tried to push the memories away. But deep down, I knew the echoes of the void would always be with me, a haunting reminder of the shadows that lurked beyond the stars. Days later, as we reached Earth and the familiar sights came into view, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I thought we had escaped, but the whispers never truly left me. I knew now that the darkness of Mars had touched us, and even as we stepped back into the light, the void would always linger just beneath the surface. When I first entered the abandoned colony, the silence was suffocating. The air was thick with dust, and the faint hum of our suits was the only sound breaking the stillness. I looked around at the remnants of what had once been a bustling outpost on Mars. Crumbling walls, rusted equipment, and forgotten personal items littered the ground. Why did they leave all this behind? I wondered aloud, my voice echoing off the metal surfaces. My partner, Sarah, shifted uncomfortably, her helmet reflecting the dim light. "I don't like this place," she whispered, glancing nervously at the shadows that danced in the corners of our view. As we moved deeper into the colony, the sense of abandonment weighed heavily on us. We passed through the main corridor, its walls adorned with faded photographs of the crew that once inhabited this place. They looked so happy, smiling faces that felt hauntingly out of place in the current desolation. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a cracked display case. Inside, a collection of trophies and awards sat in dust, relics of achievements that now felt meaningless. Suddenly, something caught my eye on the floor. It was a diary, its cover worn and frayed. I picked it up, brushing off the dust to reveal a name, Dr. Amelia Hart. "Let's see what she wrote," I said, flipping it open. The pages were filled with her neat handwriting, detailing daily life in Ares colony, scientific discoveries, and mundane tasks. But as I flipped through, I noticed the entries grew more erratic. "We're not alone here," I read aloud, my heart racing. "I can feel it watching me. It knows things. Things it shouldn't." Sarah's breath quickened. "What does she mean? What did she see?" I turned to the last entry, the ink smudged and shaky. "It knows we're here." A chill ran down my spine as I read the words, feeling an oppressive weight settle over us. "Maybe we should leave," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling. But curiosity urged me on. "Let's find out what happened to them. They can't just disappear without a trace." Reluctantly, Sarah nodded, and we continued deeper into the colony. As we moved through the halls, the air grew colder, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Every creak of metal echoed ominously, and I couldn't shake the sensation that something lurked just beyond our vision. In the mess hall, we discovered more signs of chaos. Tables were overturned, chairs scattered as if a struggle had taken place. Plates and utensils lay strewn about, some still bearing remnants of food long gone. "What happened here?" Sarah whispered, scanning the room. I approached a wall where several photographs hung askew. They were images of the crew celebrating an accomplishment, a successful launch, I guessed. But one photo caught my eye. It showed a shadowy figure in the background, barely visible. "Look at this," I said, showing Sarah the image. "Do you see that?" She squinted, frowning. "That can't be real, can it?" Before I could respond, a loud bang echoed from the corridor outside, causing us to jump. "What was that?" Sarah gasped, her eyes wide. "Let's check it out," I suggested, though my heart pounded in my chest. We cautiously stepped into the corridor, the air thick with anticipation. As we walked, the lights flickered above us, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to shift and stretch. The sound of our boots on the metallic floor was amplified, drowning out any other noise. We reached the source of the noise, a door at the end of the hallway that had swung open, revealing a dark room beyond. I hesitated, then slowly approached, feeling a pull of curiosity mingled with dread. "Should we go in?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I replied, though uncertainty gnawed at me. We stepped into the room, and as we did, the door creaked shut behind us. The darkness enveloped us, and I activated my suit's flashlight, illuminating the walls lined with more photographs and charts. In the center of the room sat a large table, cluttered with equipment and papers. A computer terminal blinked weakly, and I moved to it, my fingers hovering over the keys. "Maybe we can find out what happened," I said, typing in commands. The screen flickered to life, displaying data logs and video recordings. "Play back the last logs," I instructed, and Sarah leaned closer, her breath catching. The first video showed the crew going about their daily tasks, laughing and interacting. But as I fast-forwarded, the atmosphere changed. The crew's demeanor grew tense, and whispers filled the air. "It's getting worse," one voice said. "We have to leave before it's too late." "What if it's watching us?" another responded. The video abruptly cut off, leaving us in silence. "That was unsettling," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and I felt a chill breeze sweep through the room. I glanced at the door, it was slightly ajar. "Did you leave that open?" I asked, my heart racing. "No," Sarah replied, her eyes wide with fear. We moved cautiously towards the door, peering into the corridor. It felt wrong, as if the very walls were alive with a hidden presence. "I think we should go," Sarah urged, her voice quaking. "Just a bit longer," I insisted, driven by an unexplainable urge to uncover the truth. We stepped into the corridor, and that's when we heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Get out." I froze, my heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" Sarah nodded, her face pale. "It sounded human. Maybe it's someone left behind." I called out, moving down the hallway. "Hello? Is anyone there?" But as I shouted, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices calling from the shadows. I felt the walls closing in, the temperature dropping rapidly. "Let's go!" Sarah shouted, grabbing my arm. I turned to run, but something caught my eye, a figure standing at the end of the corridor, obscured by darkness. I squinted, trying to make it out. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, and a jolt of terror shot through me. It was a woman, her face pale and hollow, eyes sunken. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. Instead, a cold wave of dread washed over me. "Run!" I screamed, yanking Sarah back as I sprinted down the hall. We raced towards the exit, the whispers following us, rising in intensity, wrapping around us like tendrils. Please, just keep moving. Sarah urged, her breath coming in gasps. We burst through the entrance, the harsh Martian sunlight blinding us momentarily. But we didn't stop. We ran toward our rover, adrenaline propelling us forward. Once inside, I fumbled with the controls, my hands shaking. Go! Go! I shouted, slamming the door shut. As the rover powered up, I glanced back at the colony. The entrance loomed ominously, shadows flickering at the threshold. I felt an intense gaze upon us, and I knew we were being watched. Drive! Sarah urged, her voice breaking. I pressed the accelerator, and we sped away from Ares' colony, the landscape blurring around us. The whispers faded, but the feeling of dread lingered, settling in my bones. We drove in silence, the weight of what we'd experienced hanging heavy in the air. Do you think anyone will believe us? Sarah finally asked, her voice a mere whisper. I shook my head, still trying to process it all. I don't know. But we can't go back. Not ever. As we made our way across the Martian landscape, the colony disappeared from view, but the chilling memories remained. Days later, as we reported our findings, the diary and the logs were confiscated. Officially, the Ares colony was just another failed expedition, a footnote in the history of Mars. But I knew the truth, the shadows of Ares colony were still out there, watching, waiting. And they knew we had seen them.